No one ever noticed the man who arrived early. He stood at the edge of the wedding hall long before the guests flooded in, adjusting the sleeves of a suit he had worn only twice before, once to bury his wife and now to give away his daughter. The fabric was a little outdated, the shoulders slightly loose from a body that had thinned over the years, but it was clean, pressed carefully by his own hands the night before. He had barely slept, not because of excitement, though there was pride in his chest, but because old memories had a habit of waking up when life grew quiet. Memories of nights spent counting coins at the kitchen table, of hands cracked from work, of promises whispered to a little girl who used to fall asleep on his chest, trusting him with a faith so pure it hurt to remember now. His name didn't matter much anymore. People rarely said it. To most, he was simply Asterisk, the bride's father Asterisk. To some, just Asterisk, that old man Asterisk. He watched the whole slowly transform. Flowers arranged, chairs aligned, lights tested again and again. Everything was perfect, everything was expensive, everything had been paid for by someone else, and that was fine. He told himself it was fine. Once, a long time ago, he had dreams too. Not loud ones, quiet dreams. Honest ones. He had wanted a simple life with dignity, a job that mattered, a home filled with laughter. For a while, he even had that. Then life did what it always does, it demanded payment. When his wife fell ill, the world narrowed. Hospital corridors replaced sunsets. Medical bills replaced vacations. He sold what little he had, worked wherever he could, and learned how to smile through exhaustion so his daughter wouldn't feel afraid. He never told her how scared he was. He never told her about the nights he skipped meals so she could eat better, or the job he turned down because it would have taken him away from home, or the dream he buried the day he realized survival mattered more than recognition. She grew up well, too well, perhaps. She became elegant, educated, confident. She learned to speak with polished words and effortless smiles. Somewhere along the way, his rough hands and simple clothes stopped fitting into her world. He noticed it in small ways at first, how she corrected his grammar, how she avoided introducing him to certain friends, how her hugs grew lighter, quicker. He never complained. Parents like him didn't complain. They endured. The groom arrived later, surrounded by laughter and admiration. He was everything the father was not tall, confident, wealthy, admired. A man used to being listened to. A man who had never known what it felt like to be invisible. The father studied him quietly. He saw the way the groom spoke asterisk over asterisk people, not asterisk to asterisk them. How his jokes landed at the expense of others. How he barely acknowledged the man who had raised the woman he was about to marry. Still the father smiled. Still he offered a handshake. Still he wished them happiness, because love to him was never about pride. As guests began filling the hall, whispers followed him like shadows, some curious, some judgmental, some dismissive. He heard them without listening. Asterisk, is that him? Asterisk, asterisk, he doesn't look like much. Asterisk, asterisk, I heard he didn't contribute much to the wedding. Asterisk, he stood straighter anyway. When his daughter finally appeared, radiant in white, his breath caught. For a moment the years peeled away, and he saw her as she once was, small fingers wrapped around his, trusting him to lead her forward. Tears blurred his vision. Asterisk this, asterisk, he thought, asterisk was worth everything. Asterisk, he didn't know yet that the day would carve a wound deeper than any he had known before. He didn't know that soon laughter would turn sharp, and silence would become his loudest companion. For now he stood quietly in the corner of a celebration he had built with his blood and bones, unseen, unthanked, and unaware that the world was about to test how much humiliation a good man could carry without breaking. And still he smiled. The music swelled as the reception began, bright and joyful, spilling laughter into every corner of the hall. Crystal glasses clinked, plates shimmered under chandeliers, the kind of celebration meant to mark a beginning. The father took his seat near the back. He hadn't been assigned there officially, but no one questioned it. Important people sat closer to the center business partners, friends with impressive titles, relatives who spoke loudly and confidently. He folded his hands in his lap, careful not to disturb the place setting, as though even the tablecloth deserved more respect than he did. From where he sat, he could see his daughter clearly. She was glowing. Her smile was practiced but beautiful, the kind of smile she wore when everything was going according to plan. When her eyes briefly met his, she hesitated just a flicker, then looked away. He told himself he imagined it. Asterisk, she's busy. Asterisk, he reasoned. Asterisk, it's her day. Asterisk, the groom stood often, moving from table to table, shaking hands, accepting praise. He wore confidence like a tailored suit. When he laughed, others followed. When he spoke, people leaned in. The father noticed that the groom never once came to his table. It stung more than it should have. Dinner passed in a blur of polite applause and half-heard speeches. The father clapped when others did, smiled when expected. He tasted very little of the food. His attention never left his daughter, as if watching her closely enough could protect her from whatever future waited beyond this night. Then the music softened. A hush rolled through the hall as the groom rose from his chair, glass in hand. The microphone crackled lightly as he tapped it, testing the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, grinning, "thank you all for being here to celebrate the best decision of my life." Applause erupted. The father joined in, though his palms felt numb. The groom continued, delivering practice compliments about love, success, destiny. People laughed at the right moments, glasses lifted. The mood was warm, indulgent. Then his tone shifted. "And of course," the groom added, scanning the room, "we're all shaped by the people who raise us." The father felt his chest tighten. For a moment hope flickered, fragile and foolish. The groom's gaze stopped. He pointed, straight at him. "And here's to not living a worthless life like this old man. For a heartbeat, the world didn't move." Then laughter burst out, sharp, surprised, contagious. Some guests laughed because others did. Some laughed to hide their discomfort. Some laughed because cruelty, when dressed as humor, is easy to accept. The father didn't laugh. He felt the words land like a hand around his throat. Worthless, the syllables echoed, stacking on top of years he had spent questioning his own value in silence. He looked toward his daughter. She didn't defend him. She didn't speak. She lowered her head. That hurt more than the laughter. The father felt something inside him fracture, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet way bones break when no one is watching. He forced his lips into a faint smile, the same one he had practiced for decades, the same one he used when pain was inconvenient to others. Asterisk, maybe they're right. Asterisk, a traitorous thought whispered. Asterisk, maybe this is all I am. Asterisk, applause followed the toast. Glasses clinked. The band struck up a cheerful tune, as if nothing irreversible had just occurred. The father stood slowly. No one tried to stop him. No one noticed. He walked away from the table, past people still laughing, past a celebration built on a moment of cruelty, and found himself near the edge of the hall again, where he had begun the day. His hands trembled slightly. He pressed them together to still them. He thought of his wife, of the nights she had thanked him for being enough, of the little girl who once believed her father was the strongest man in the world. He wondered when he had stopped being seen as a man at all. The music played on. Behind him, joy continued, unaware, or uncaring that a father's heart had just been broken in front of everyone he loved. And he stood there, silent, carrying the weight of a lifetime reduced to a single, laughing sentence. The father remained where he was, standing just beyond the reach of the light, as if the brightness of the celebration no longer belonged to him. The laughter still rang in his ears, looping endlessly, each echo softer but sharper than the last. He stared at the floor, at the polished marble reflecting shoes that passed without slowing. For the first time in many years, he felt tired in a way sleep could not fix. He considered leaving. Slipping out quietly had always been his strength, but something held him there, perhaps habit, perhaps the stubborn part of him that had survived far worse than ridicule. "Excuse me," the voice was calm, steady, old but not weak. The father looked up. Standing before him was his father-in-law. Not a man prone to unnecessary movement or empty gestures. He carried himself with a quiet authority that commanded respect without demanding it. His hair was silver, his posture straight, his eyes sharp with intelligence sharpened by decades of observation. Around him conversations dulled, as though the room itself sensed something significant approaching. The father straightened instinctively. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he said softly, already apologizing for a humiliation he hadn't earned. The older man raised a hand. "You caused none." He studied the father closely, not with pity, but with recognition. "I've been looking for the right moment," the father-in-law said. "It seems the right moment has found me instead." The father frowned slightly. "I'm not sure I understand." The older man smiled just enough to crease the corners of his eyes. "May I have your autograph?" The words hung in the air, weighty and absurd. "My autograph," the father repeated, almost laughing. "I think you're mistaken." "I am not," the father-in-law replied. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and withdrew a worn book. Its cover was faded, its pages dog-eared, annotated in the margins with careful handwriting. The father's breath caught. He recognized it instantly. "You wrote this," the older man said quietly. "Under a name you stopped using a long time ago." The room seemed to tilt. That book, the father whispered, was never meant to be famous. And yet it was, the father-in-law said. It changed how people thought, how they lived. It changed me. A few near by guests had gone silent, drawn by the gravity in the older man's voice. Whispers faltered, eyes turned, you disappeared. The father-in-law continued, "No interviews, no appearances, no credit. Many assumed you were dead. I chose to be." The father replied, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Some lives are safer, lived quietly." The older man nodded. "I understand sacrifice. I also understand greatness." The groom, sensing a tension shift, glanced over. His confident smile wavered when he saw who stood at the center of the gathering now. The daughter rose slowly from her seat, confusion knitting her brow as she watched unfamiliar expressions, respect, disbelief, spread across faces she knew well. "That worthless life," the father-in-law said calmly, his voice carrying without effort, "has saved lives, built futures, inspired generations." A murmur rippled through the hall. Father shook his head. "None of that matters tonight." "It does," the older man replied, "because worth is not decided by volume, money, or cruelty. It is decided by what remains when no one is watching." He held out the book again. "Please." After a moment's hesitation, the father accepted it. His hand no longer trembled as he signed his name, slowly, deliberately. A name he had once believed the world no longer needed to remember. Gasps followed. Someone recognized it. Then another. The daughter's face drained of color. She looked at her father, not as a burden, not as an embarrassment, but as a stranger, one she had never truly known. The groom set his glass down, the sound too loud in the sudden hush. The father handed the book back gently. "I never wanted applause," he said softly. "I only wanted my child to be proud." Silence answered him. Not the empty silence of shame, but the heavy, reverent kind that comes when truth finally steps into the light. And in that moment, without raising his voice or lifting a finger, the name everyone had overlooked became the only one that mattered. The hall no longer sounded the same. Where laughter had once spilled freely, there was now a careful stillness, as if every guest had suddenly become aware of the weight of their own voice. Conversations resumed in whispers. Eyes followed the father wherever he moved, not with curiosity this time, but with respect edged by regret. He felt none of the triumph people imagine when truth finally wins, only relief. The father-in-law placed a steady hand on his shoulder and guided him back toward the center of the room. No announcement was made, none was needed. The path simply opened, chairs shifted. People stood without realizing why. The groom remained frozen near the head table. Up close, the arrogance that had once filled him now seemed fragile, brittle. His smile had vanished, replaced by a tight, uncertain expression. He attempted a laugh, but it died before leaving his throat. "Well," he said lightly, "I was just joking earlier. No harm meant. No one responded. Jokes require laughter. Respect requires silence." The father did not look at him. He did not need to. Instead, he turned to his daughter. She stood trembling, her hands clenched in the folds of her dress. Tears spilled freely now, streaking the careful makeup she had chosen for this perfect day. When she spoke, her voice broke. "Dad, I didn't know." The word *dad* felt unfamiliar, as though she were trying it on after years of neglect. He studied her face, the child he had protected from storms, from hunger, from fear, the woman who had lowered her head when he needed her most. "I know," he said gently. Those two words carried no anger. That was the hardest part. Around them, the guests shifted uncomfortably. Some remembered their laughter, others remembered their silence. A few approached quietly to shake his hand, to thank him, to apologize without words. Phones were discreetly put away. Connections were reconsidered. People who mattered began to reassess who they chose to align themselves with. The father-in-law spoke again, his voice firm and unmistakable. "I believe this celebration should pause," he said. "There are matters of character that deserve reflection." The implication was clear. The groom's business partners exchanged glances. One stepped back, then another. Invitations would be declined. Calls would go unanswered. Deals would dissolve, not out of spite, but because cruelty reveals instability, and no one trusts a man who mocks sacrifice. The groom understood this too late. He opened his mouth to speak again, but nothing came out. The father picked up his coat. He had not planned to leave early, but he knew when his part was done. At the door, his daughter ran after him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, collapsing into his arms the way she hadn't since childhood. "I forgot who you were." He held her, just as he always had. "I never stopped being your father," he replied. That was the only forgiveness she would receive that night, and it was more powerful than punishment. He stepped out into the cool evening air, the noise of the hall fading behind him. The stars above were quiet, steady, unchanged by human cruelty or praise. For the first time in years, his back felt lighter. He had been laughed at, dismissed, called worthless. And yet, without raising his voice, without defending himself, without demanding respect, he had been seen. Not by the crowd, not by the groom, but by the truth, and that was the sweetest revenge of all.